Hello, everyone. Eimear Burke here, and welcome to another Fireside Chat. And this is Fireside Chat 138, where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. And as is customary, I start with a prayer for peace. Gomara Shiacon ar fud na crinne. Gomara Shiacon in our Jaili agus in our Jirha. Gonairi Lin Lenakuj Garamaka. Gamuj Buichas Jeev, Jeha Chivdaka, Spirit Chivdaka. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities, for peace. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their dreams the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain. With thanks to John O'Donoghue. So you're all very, very welcome. And let me see where you're all from. Penzance in West Cornwall. Hello from Ulster, where spring has arrived. That's a nice Brittany in France. Rainy old London. Gold Coast in Australia, you're up early. Noisy. Hailstones on the skylight in Killaloo. Wonderful. Crouch End, damp and chilly. Peace and serenity. New York, Kamloops in BC. Great puddles of Hertfordshire. It's wonderful. We're slowly sinking into the mud. Hello from Sweden, where the snow is melting. Mimsy, hi Mimsy from Flanders. And hello to Sparky. That's her dog. Anyway, there's a few from the US too. You've gone up. Soggy Normandy. Oh my God, these are great. It's actually dry here in Kilkenny, thank goodness. The sun was shining, the sky was quite blue. It's cold. Well, 4, 5, 6 degrees. That's kind of cold for us here. Wyoming, wonderful. And slushy greetings from Calgary in Alberta. Madrid, brilliant. And colourful, what is it? Geraldine calling in from a moisture-filled rain-snow mix in colourful Colorado. We need the rain. So let all of us who need rain get it, and all of us who need some warmth and sunshine get it. Anyway, let me go over to, we're in the UK this week, and we're going to Hampshire to Lucy Jones. Lucy, you're so welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
So you are in Basingstoke or Basingstoke?
Basingstoke. Or Amazing Stoke, as we call it.
Amazing Stoke. Okay. So, and I have no idea where that is. I mean, I've heard of it, but what's it like? What's your landscape like?
So Basingstoke is in the county of Hampshire, and it's quite flat. It's very wooded and, well, not as much as I'd like it to be, but very arboreal. We've got beautiful patches of ancient woodland, and at the moment the spring flowers are just coming out, violets and celandines, I never know how to pronounce that one. The buds are coming, the wild garlic is starting to come out. I haven't seen any frog spawn yet. I live in a town. I live on quite a kind of busy area, main road, next to a train station and a shopping mall, and I also live next to a really old cemetery, which dates back from the 14th century, full of yews and lichen and moss, and it's a really special place.
Beautiful. Pat, who's in Ulster, says, I love being Irish. We're the only people who find Basingstoke mysterious and exotic. And then Cliff says, hello, Lucy, from just down the road in Wickham, near Winchester.
Yeah. Cool. Hello.
So I'm delighted to we met a few years ago when you were writing an article for Emergence, yes. And then you gave a wonderful talk this year at our winter gathering. Our theme was animism. So
it was an amazing day.
So Sean Clancy, who's in the Midlands here. So we do have a Midlands. When I say I was born in the Midlands, people say, "Oh, Britain! I thought you were Irish." And I go, "No, we have a Midlands too." So Wild Garrick is always such beautiful herald of spring, and he says he can't wait for it here, so we can start making the butter again. It hasn't come yet here. So anyway, just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit of your background.
Sure. What kind of work-wise or generally anything? I am a writer. I'm a journalist and an author. I tend to write about ecology, the living world, and mental health. Really interested in the relationship between the human psyche and the rest of nature. So yeah, science, environment, health are kind of my subjects. I write for lots of newspapers and magazines. And I've written a number of books. I have 3 young children. So the last kind of 7 years has really been, a lot of quite intensive caregiving. And yeah, that's me.
So we're going to talk about one book that I've read, Matrescence, and we'll talk about that later. So, in terms of your spiritual background, how did you find the order? How did you find Druidry? How did you find the order? What was that journey?
Sure. So I think I have to answer that question by a bit of kind of background context. I had an upbringing in conservative evangelical Christianity, and I was very imbued in the Bible and quite kind of intense Christian camps and churches which were very kind of thought in quite an exclusive way, that there was only one path to God or spirituality, and I was brought up to be kind of wary of yoga or anything that wasn't straight up Christianity. I lost my faith in my early 20s, and that was quite a big deal. But what never really left me was a kind of, I suppose, a pattern of kind of yearning or longing or a sense of mystery, and of that which is larger than us. And so, but for quite a long time, I didn't really have much interest. I was kind of slightly scarred, I think, by some of the church I was in. And then I was writing a book called Losing Eden, which is about the kind of the connection between the human mind and the rest of nature. And I'd had this like quite personal epiphanic experience where in my 20s I had recurrent depression, and I'd had quite a bad period of depression and addiction. And in my recovery, I found like 4 things really helpful. The three of them are straightforward and understandable, like psychiatry and psychotherapy and support groups and the love of friends and family. But the fourth, and this was about 12 years ago, was really surprising to me, which sounds kind of naive now when we talk about nature and mental health quite a lot, but it was basically spending time with trees and in a particular space where I found myself refinding my relationship with the rest of nature that I had as a child, and feeling like I was in communion with the non-human world. And I was working as a science journalist at the time, and kind of fortunately for me that there was this big, and is this really big, fertile field of scientists across the world studying this relationship, trying to kind of measure and quantify, what happens when we are by a river or by the sea or in the wood, what happens to our nervous systems, to our brains, when we listen to bird song, what happens, what's in the soil that affects our mental health and so on. So there was loads of really exciting scientific research which illuminated this subject, which I could write about. But it got to a point where I kind of got to, I couldn't get further with the science. It felt like there were lots of things that happen which you can't prove in a lab, or you can't study in a lab, that kind of ineffable or numinous. And Eimear, I don't know how I can't remember what my route into Druidry was, but I think I came across Philip's work, and then so this was about maybe 6 years ago or something, and I interviewed him for the book. We went for a walk, and I started to just be really drawn to Druidry, and then I became a member of the order in kind of early COVID, in lockdown, and I think what appealed to me was, I think maybe it's quite a common thing. Just I had this kind of yearning and longing to have more of a connection and kind of embodied and kind of sensory experience and relationship with the land and the rest of nature. And so much of my own upbringing had been, about separating humans from nature, and I'm constantly trying to kind of unlearn that. And I found in Druidry a way of, learning about ritual and symbols and ceremony and the wheel of the year, and that was really appealing. And also the fact that the openness of it, like after growing up in quite a kind of constricting, dogmatic religion, the kind of democratic openness of just felt so generative to me, and really appealing. So that's what led me to Druidry.
It's I grew up with I grew up in the One True Church, so there's going to be competition here,
What's that?
I grew up in the One True Church.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah. And others, philosophical says that's relatable. My parents' church was an authoritarian evangelical cult, so it took me till 30 to come out of it all. So, and then Sean McCann, who's been a guest on the chat here, I grew up going to an evangelical Bible camp, indoctrination flavored with marshmallows and hot dogs and crusty hymns.
Might have been the same one as me. Yeah.
And his was in Canada. So no, I grew up with that too. But I was agnostic from the time I was 9, but still hanging on because it was still had to go to mass and things like that. And Catherine says, what does class as a true church? Well, there you are now. There's the question. Anyone who tests that they have one, they know the answer. Nobody else knows the answer, I think. But took me a long time. Then I moved away. I couldn't stand the word ritual. Even pagan was heavily loaded for me because I've been grown up, pagans are worshippers of false gods, or they believe in nothing, and it's the worst kind of thing you could be. It took me a long time. And then Druidry just answered that. It was like, and funny, I'm a psychologist. So, I'll always ask people, what do they do to feed their spirit? And so many people, ordinary people, who are depressed, et cetera, and you say, what do you do? And they go, if I go in the woods, I just feel so much. I said, what does it do to you? And they go, I can feel this, this weight lifting off my head, off my shoulders. I don't know, but I feel so much better by going for a walk. And it's a no-brainer. And now psychology has discovered. So when I go to conferences now, people are talking about nature, and they go, no, we have the validation now. Science is actually endorsing this. So therefore it is of value. And I'm kind of amused that doing this for years, and people have now discovered forest schools and these are valid, etc. Even, physio for children who maybe have mobility issues, if they're in forest schools because they're maybe climbing a tree or they're gathering things. And that's really interesting physio because you don't even know you're doing it. So it's...
It is so interesting that we've become so estranged and disconnected from the rest of the living world that, we need evidence and science to prove it.
And, nobody ever, science never demands, or no scientist ever says, you claim that you love your children and you love them with a passion, or you love your husband, or you love your lover, or whoever it is. And that cannot be measured. And, within science, things have to be measurable and replicable, etc. And we need double-blind studies, etc. And yet love is one of that conundrum that all they can show if they do a PET scan is there's one part of your brain that lights up if you're having loving feelings, but you can't measure it. Do I love you more than you love me? Or do you love your children equally? Or do you love one more than the other? Or how does your husband love you more than you love? All those kind of things. And yet nobody ever questions the validity of love. And it's one of those greatest mysteries. It breaks your heart. It brings joy to your life. It causes all sorts of dilemmas and joys. And people die for it, kill for it, love for it. It's just amazing and do really good things. And yet we can't measure it or actually say what it is.
Yeah.
One of those fascinating things. And we've got... Sean says, take your troubles to the trees, it freezes and it feeds them. Spiritual photosynthesis, and just others. There are other people relating to your early experience of, fundamentalist religious background and the damage that can do. And it's just wonderful to be able to find this.
It really is, yeah. And I went to the winter conference, and it was the first. So I'm quite kind of introverted, and I've basically just been in, looking after children for 7 years. So I haven't kind of met with Druids as much as I'd have liked to. But the winter conference was amazing. I was really nervous about talking. It was the biggest group of people I've ever given a talk to, but there was such warmth and kindness and humor and humanity, and it was awesome. So different because I went to a lot of conferences and camps, and the religion I was raised in, and it was really healing to be somewhere where it didn't feel like being judged or being a sinner or all that stuff.
Dogma free. So it's people wanted to hear what you had to say, that each speaker comes, and of course there's a thread going through them. Now, it wasn't the occult conference in Glastonbury. Somebody's asking that. It was our winter gathering, the Orders winter gathering, and in our winter gathering we always have speakers, and our theme was animism, and we had Graham Harvey and Gordon McClellan speaking as well, and our theme was animism. And it was just wonderful, those threads that were woven by the three of you with 3 different presentations, and that was just wonderful.
Yeah, and the chanting, the Awan chanting was so moving. It was incredibly moving to be in.
Were you there for the mistletoe ceremony at the beginning?
Yeah, it was beautiful.
I always, that's one of my favorites. And I was so glad we got to do it again, because we hadn't done it since 2019. And then we didn't know if we were going to be able to access mistletoe, because the original source, everything had changed. And it is, and I know there were members crying just in the theatre while it was going on. It's always so magical. And it's so simple, you know. Very, very simple ritual. Just beautiful, just so beautiful.
Powerful.
So I'm listening. Just Susan says, just returned from some giant old growth trees. Asked them to remove my anxiety and sadness. Plus, laid on the ground, I feel better. Thank you for sharing that, Susan. Absolutely. Philosophical, to me, it's been delightful as a pagan who always loved science to see parallels jumping out everywhere between magic and science. It all comes together instead of needing to be compartmentalized. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm a member of the Scientific and Medical Network, which is based in the UK, but it's a global organization for people, scientists or scientifically minded people who are interested in things that are extraordinary. And one of the conferences they run every year is the Mystics and Scientists Conference. And Howard, my late husband, and I used to go to them. And first one I ever went to was on trees, the nature of trees. So you had tree huggers and climatologists and shamans and healers and all sorts coming together and nobody fighting. All talking about the magic and the wonder of trees from different perspectives, but each being able to look at the perspective of the other.
I love that. Yeah. Because it's just different ways of interpreting, isn't it? And different ways of seeing. Like if someone says, you know, I love, I can't remember the name of the person who's just been with the old growth forests, but old growth trees. You know, if someone might say, I interviewed quite a lot of people for my book, and you know, people would talk about how they feel when they're in the woods, and you know, they don't feel judged in the woods, or they feel a kind of sense of oneness, or just simply happy. You know, lots of I visited quite a lot of like ecotherapy initiatives, like horticultural therapy, you know, for people with dementia and learning difficulties and mental health problems, and horticultural therapy in medium secure units where, you know, people are extremely unwell. And often, you know, people would just say it just simply makes you feel happy. But then, you know, the science can give us a lens of thinking, okay, so we know that there's this bacteria in the soil called Mycobacteria and vaccae, which was discovered by chance, has antidepressant-like effects when we're exposed to it. So when we're kind of inhaling just soil. So if you love gardening, that might be why you have a buzz after gardening. And I think all these different ways of thinking and knowing, and you know, ways of knowledge just can complement each other. And you know, my intention with my research and writing that book was, you know, to know a bit of the science can kind of augment the relationship, or you know, if you're, I think it can kind of help us pay attention and be grateful, and kind of maybe a kind of like radical noticing, or even if you're on an urban street like where I live, you see like a spray of weeds in the pavement. You know, those weeds are often in fractal shapes, and fractal shapes, which are everywhere in nature, have a particular resonance with our brains and can make us feel less stressed. So I think, I don't know, I just, yeah, all these ways of knowing are good.
And Sylvia says, sometimes when I'm unable to pull myself out of struggles that visit me, I open my herbs cupboard to smell my dried magical plants. Those spirits help me equalize. Just saying. Absolutely. I'm just struck by the fractals you're talking about, because when I'm in an urban area and I see things like that, it always gives me a buzz straight away. It's like either the determination of that plant to push through an impossible place or a crack, or seeing trees. It always just wows me.
Yeah.
And it actually, I do get a buzz from it.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting, the kind of, every individual makes meaning in different ways. So, you seeing the determination in that so-called weed or plant. People create their own meanings out of metaphors and symbolism, and those are things that you can't measure, or kind of empirically prove with randomized controlled trials. But that doesn't mean that they're less important and meaningful. It's
Philosophical says, rosemary has instant calming effects on me. I used to carry a sprig to interviews, and that's a personal relationship, because it's interesting because rosemary is a stimulant. It stimulates the brain. Like, you wouldn't take rosemary going to sleep because it'll keep you awake. But her relationship, or Philosophical's relationship with the rosemary, is an individual relationship. But what it does do for interviews, it keeps you alert, it keeps you switched on and focused to help you, which can help you be calm. But all of it is, that's the magic of it. If we can all develop our own relationships with the plants and learn from them. So I'm always impressed with plants that are resilient, like blackberries. They drive me crazy because I have an arc and they take over and I have to manage them. But their persistence, the resilience. Ivy that can just grow everywhere and look different depending on where it needs to be. Always being able to put down roots. I mean, there's something we can learn. So but again, it's our individual relationship with plants, and it's to find that. And I suppose Druidry encourages, as I remember, I can't remember, it's in the early Gwers of the Bard, the Book of Nature, which is the best book. And it's the Book of Nature, but it's being out there. It's not what you read, it's what the trees will tell you.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the amazing things for me about Druidry is that it kind of gives you permission to think with the earth, and to listen in a way that, it has taken me a long time to, I grew up in a very patriarchal, kind of cynical world in a way, where, hippies, and I was not brought up in a place where like hippies or like, who was that guy, that brilliant guy Swampy, who was trying to save trees. At that point in the 90s, people would just kind of laugh at that, or the people in my social media, or they'd laugh at like Prince Charles talking to his plants, and
That's right, yes.
Kind of cynicism about loving nature, or like it wasn't cool. But I feel like as a culture we've missed out so much on that relationship, and I don't know why. Well, I think it's really historical, isn't it? The post-Enlightenment kind of separation of humans from nature, but the way Druidry, gives permission to think with the earth, to think through the earth, I think is like so generative, so needed in our current human crisis.
And there are so many people looking for it. And I mean, I'm always amazed at people who quietly admit to me, and I go, "That's normal." Like I just telling you, and I go, "Well, in my world, I think nothing of that. That's normal."
Yeah.
To be with trees, to hear things, talk to them. I ask trees to heal me, to take my stress away, chat to, whatever it is, meditate with. It's normal. And you know what? It's growing. And I think certainly in the last number of years, particularly with COVID, I think, and then with, the emergence of a stronger narrative around the climate, or climate change, that more and more people are coming out in some way to be able to say it.
Yeah. And I think the more you do it, the more normal it is. Like, I think there's this tree in the cemetery next to me, which I love. It's like my favorite tree. It's a massive beech tree in the center of the cemetery, and it's just beautiful. And it's got like a carpet of pinky purple cyclamen, and it's been really important being for me since living here. And I find myself drawn to this tree, and I always want to kind of lay my hands on the tree and sit underneath it and spend time with it. And at the beginning of doing that, I was quite kind of furtive and
yes,
embarrassed. If someone was coming along, I'd like put my earphones on or try to look like I was doing something. But now I just don't care, because, you know, I've had times of like rough depression, and I've needed that tree, and I don't care if I look weird. And the other thing that I sometimes get people stopping me, because I use, and I know we've talked about this even, but I love, and you've started using hand lenses.
yes.
So you can look through a hand lens at like lichen and moss or anything to have a different viewpoint. And often if I'm looking at it on the wall with in the middle of town, that is quite an unusual look, and people come and say, "Are you okay?" But we are the trees, and the trees are us, and
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting, because I'm just going to go to, it was Gordon McClellan at the Winter Gathering, when he said, he was quoting somebody else, and this is a paraphrase of that everything we eat is ensouled. So everything we eat has a soul, be it animal or plant, so that we are full of ensouled beings. And then I think it was Graham Harvey talking about, we're full of parasites and viruses and bugs, and that we need to eat ensouled beings to feed the ensouled beings within us. That there's that. It was just when they talked about that, I've always been aware. Yes, we're all interconnected, but that notion that we are. I mean, I've always known about the bacteria, but friendly parasites, because we always think parasites are not so good to have, but that everything we need to eat ensouled beings to feed the ensouled beings within us, and there's that reciprocal relationship. And I suppose we're in a constant state of dying anyway, and just some of us do it quicker than others. And it's just that wonderful connection. I think it's just absolutely fascinating.
And there was also there was a question, I think, to Gordon maybe about. It really got me thinking. It was someone asked about buildings having souls, or kind of inanimate objects, and I've been thinking quite a bit about kind of oil and plastic and things like that at the moment, and how if you take a car journey or you take a plane, actually, like the fuel is made of fossilized trees.
Ancient sunlight.
Ancient sunlight, yeah, and the machine itself, is made of the earth. It's made of, I don't really know, but it's
the metal has come from the rocks. It's come from the earth.
And I was thinking, like, what would it? Imagine if we lived in a world where, like, when they do the safety announcement before a flight, they said, and we acknowledge the beings who, have made this flight possible, or have, who died and now are containing us so we can go to our destination. I think that would be quite cool.
I used to make rattles, and people say, what's the container? Which was a plastic egg. I would say ancient. So I had aduki beans and tree bark or salmon skin and ancient sunlight. I never told them it was plastic. And it's just that acknowledgement of, it's a bit like, you acknowledge the producers of the food. You're doing a grace before meals or something like that. And just lovely to be able to say it. And we acknowledged, the ancient trees that produce the oil to fuel this, or the stones, the minerals, etc., and the crystals and all the other stuff that actually support us doing what we do.
Yeah, because I think so much of like our current crisis, and the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, is a crisis of ideas and a crisis of thinking and a crisis of kind of the myth, of disconnection, and for that to be kind of upended and eroded, kind of like a radical way of thinking of ourselves in connection.
There's a question from Sean. Curious to know, how has your Druidry reflected back or informed your research, or vice versa? Do they finish each other's sentences?
Thank you. That's a really interesting question. I think with Losing Eden, my previous book, it was really kind of in the late writing of that I met Philip, and then when that book was published, that's when I joined the order. And really my work, I have written another book, but really my work has been raising people, looking after children. So I guess I'll answer the question slightly differently and say that I think discovering Druidry and starting to learn more about it and has given me a way of bringing up my kids or prioritizing their own natural relationship with the living world, that I don't know, it feels like it's kind of grounded me a bit, and given me kind of a framework to kind of do rituals or respect their wild selves for as long as possible.
Yes. It's beautiful.
And I have me and my neighbours are like rewilding them. We've got this tiny field at the back of our house. I mean, it's not really a field, it's really small, but our intention for it was to basically give it back to the non-human world and the living world. And I told this story in the winter conference, so apologies if you've heard it before, but it was literally like a kind of amenity mown grass field with just classic ryegrass, and we asked them to stop the mowing, and planted a number of trees, and within months it kind of erupted into this like wildflower meadow, prairie-like meadow, all sorts of different species of grasses and flowers and moths and butterflies and beetles and ladybirds, and it's an incredible place. Like every summer, it's just so alive. And I guess, Druidry empowers me, I think, to want to do things like, plant trees and to join with my neighbours to stand up as much as I can for the land and the world around us.
It's beautiful. And it's the simplicity and the speed with which, when you leave an area alone, how it can recover. And then you have seeds that have been there just waiting for the right conditions just to go. And that's that determination, that magic, that's somehow knowing the right time to do it and to persist. And it's just beautiful. Ricky says, I know caretakers, curators always want to treat all equitably. Of course they do, Ricky. But do you have a favorite tree or a plant?
Oh, that's such a nice question. Oh, wow. I think I have to say oak.
Okay.
I think I have to say oak. And I'm really into honeysuckle. Trying to plant lots of honeysuckle because I want to attract moths to our garden. And it was one of the plants which I remember being a child, and my great uncle, who died recently, came over from San Francisco, and he picked a honeycomb flower when I was a kid, and he took the kind of stamen out, and on the end of it was a drop of the honeysuckle kind of nectar, and he said, eat that. And I remember the sweetness of it and the magic of it, of like, oh, and it was such a kind of sensory, like tactile moment. It's always stayed with me. So yeah, those two. But I think it changes depending on. I think that's the like incredible thing about being in relationship with trees and plants, is you find the different ones at different times of your life as well.
That's right. I love honeysuckle, and I love wild honeysuckle. We call it woodbine in English here. It's also called fechlin in Irish, and it calls you. It calls me long before I see it, and that always excites me. It's that beginning of summer. You kind of go, and as soon as you said you tasting that nectar, I know I can remember the smell. It's just it's absolutely incredible. Just so beautiful.
And the nectar really tastes like that smell. It really is honeyish. It's amazing.
Incredible. Sean says, just you talking about your kids, that echoes so much. My own kids are 7 and 5, and there's almost a selfish joy and sense of rediscovery watching them develop connections and expressions in harmony with nature. My wife's calling it pagan parenting.
Yeah.
So it's Linda, she's in Australia. Mine has always been frangipani, as it was the only tree that they had in the garden where she grew up.
That smells lovely, doesn't it? I think.
And I don't know that the smell of that. And then Susan, I've just discovered European beech trees. They are massive like elephants, amazing trees. And Julia Foyle, her dad taught her to do that with the honeysuckle as well, and it stayed with her. It's just beautiful. Those wonderful, because smell, can be so evocative. Just beautiful.
It's the oldest, isn't it?
Isn't it? And Sylvia says, we're the elements and the elementals. Life is our theatre. A teacher expressed it this way. Plants are the sun made edible. Love what is being here. She said she loves what is being here shared today. Gratitude touches all the petals of the flower. Beautiful.
Lovely work.
Yeah, just beautiful. Okay, it's wonderful. So now, just to go back to your lens. So, because you talked about slime molds at the winter gathering, and earlier, and we're going to show pictures, because everybody, I think I'm now going to have a new obsession, because this is just when you talked about it. I mean, I heard about slime molds, and I always thought they were just like slimy things that moved. But you're looking at works of art. You're looking at nature miracles that look like mini trees. And anyway, so I'm going to hand over to you, and we're going to show some pictures of photos of slime molds. Why are you interested in slime molds? So over to you.
Okay. So I had never heard about slime molds until 3 or so years ago. Someone was getting The New Scientist, and there was a photograph in The New Scientist by an amazing photographer called Barry Webb, whose photos we'll look at in a sec. And I couldn't believe my eyes, what I was looking at. It looked like a kind of raspberry on stilts, bright pink. I couldn't really work out what it was. And then in the caption it said Buckinghamshire, which is the neighbouring county to me. I think Wycombe's in Buckinghamshire, just up the road. And I thought, okay, I've got to find out more. And I'm sure some of you will know what slime molds are, but I'll just explain. Slime molds, also known as myxomycetes, are fungus-like organisms. They're in the kingdom Protista, which is my favourite kingdom. It's the kind of ragtag others that can't really be categorized in any of the fungi, etc. They are organisms which have really different stages, and that's what drew me to them, as well as their beauty. So they start life as what's called plasmodium, which is basically what you would imagine slime to be. So a kind of slick of slime, which is usually yellow. And in this stage of its life, slime molds are like animals, really. They predate, they can anticipate, they can teach. They don't have a brain, but they are very intelligent. They have been used by scientists to like map the Tokyo bus routes and even mapping dark matter. They can solve problems. And so
But they've no brain. Is that what you said?
Yeah, they have no brain. Yeah, there's obviously more like stuff that we just don't understand as humans about how they're working. And so you'd often find them on like a log, particularly a kind of like wet, moist, rotting log, or on the underside of a log. Often there's one that we have in the cemetery, which I track. I basically go. It's mostly here in winter. Anyway, so the slime mold is kind of crawling around, and then at some point it changes, and the transformation is utterly bananas. It transforms into normally a kind of colony of small mushroom-like, most exquisite, beautiful, sessile, so that it doesn't move, it's staying there, seed, spore-releasing organisms. And from there, the spores are released, and the cycle continues. And I mean, we'll show you some photos, and they are incredibly beautiful. I mean, mind-blowingly intricate. They're like goblets or egg cups or nets, and there's iridescence and all the colours of the rainbow. They're everywhere, very much, mostly in the kind of northern hemisphere or areas with wet, mild weather. You can find them all year round. They're quite tricky to find. You have to get your eye in, but they are everywhere. I found some just in my garden, in central Basingstoke before we talked. But the thing that really drew me to them as well was I was going through becoming a mother, which was a really big change for me, and I felt very different and in my matrescence, and slime molds that changed so much were the kind of soothing beings to be around, and to know that change and process and transformation is part of our world. Anyway, that's enough of me. You should.
Just one question from Sandy, and I don't think it is, but she's saying, is that similar to jelly fungus? I think she means the jelly ears that grow in bees.
No, it's not at all. It's really they kind of, you might think that they're like fungi, but no, they're not. They're different. You'll see when we look at the pictures.
Okay, so will we show?
I think we should. Yeah.
Okay, here's the first one. So.
Okay, so this is all credit to Barry Webb, because these are his photographs. Can you see what I'm doing?
Yeah, so the first one,
the first one is the plasmodium.
Okay.
Which, do you know what, Eimear? I'm just having a bit of a thought about copyright, because this video is going to stay up, isn't it? Just a bit nervous about breaking a copyright. Maybe.
So I'll put in okay. So I can put the link in. I'll just type it in.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I think. I mean, maybe if people are interested, they can go and look at Barry Webb's website, and he's on Instagram. I suppose people can probably see that right now, which is an example of what it looks like when they're kind of little lollipops and balloons, like kind of. But yeah, it just struck me that there might be a copyright thing, Eimear.
Okay.
But we can continue talking about them, and everyone can go look them up.
That's right.
I can give any advice. I can show you the ones that I saw on my phone.
Please do.
In my garden. today. Shall I unshare my screen?
Okay, I'll do that. Okay.
So, I mean, it doesn't look like much, but
okay, just bring your camera down a little bit, your phone down. Yeah. Okay. So that looks like a little fruiting forest.
Yeah. So you want to get a hand lens if you can, really, and a torch, and yeah.
Do you have a hand lens with you?
I think mine's downstairs.
Okay. Well, I've mine. So this is a hand lens. So mine has a torch. Okay, and it comes with a little thing. You see, you can hold it in your hand. So it's about. Wait a second. And then it has a torch, so you can look at whatever it is you want to see. It's interesting to look at your own skin.
Yeah. I've been wanting to. I've got a proper microscope that I got in the lockdowns, and you know, we all have like mites that live on our faces. Demodex, they're called. And I wrote a piece for the BBC about them once and talked to these people who studied these Demodex mites, and it's fascinating. So I think they're often in our eyelashes. Most people have mites on their skin, and they're, you know, mating, kind of wandering about, and then they die and they explode. And I keep meaning to get a piece of sellotape to kind of try and look at the mites, because I love that idea that, you know, we're not individuals, really, are we?
No.
Bacteria. And I read something today that's found that not only do we have fungal stuff in our brains, but also algae.
Ah.
Yeah.
In our brains.
Contain multitudes. Yeah.
Wow. So, what's the best habitat to find them? The base of trees or any damp soil or leaves?
The best place to find them is dead wood. So logs, sticks, pieces of wood that have fallen off trees, and or fence posts. So I find them in my garden on, we've got these raised beds with pallets which are kind of rotting. And they're often on the underside. But I mean, what I would suggest is like spend some time with Barry's photographs, and that's kind of what you're looking for. Holly leaves themselves, wood chippings, any matter that's kind of breaking down, and it's best if there's been some rain.
And I hope your name is Julala. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. At what point do they change? You know, from that slimy bit to the fruiting bodies. I assume they're fruiting bodies.
It's a great question. I don't think we know. It must be something to do with conditions, perhaps temperature, but we know very little about them as organisms. It's a fantastic book called Where the Slime Mold Creeps. I think that's what it's called.
Ooh, let's write that down.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. I think it's downstairs. And there's a few people studying them. There's so much we don't know. And also, for example, many of them are iridescent. Really iridescent, like so rainbowy. And I think one of the theories is that the iridescence is probably, what's the word? Like water off a duck's back, like it stops them, you know. But you know,
it's a protective factor.
Protective factor, exactly. But I don't know. I think there's so much more about these organisms that we have yet to find out, and I think we can learn from them as well.
I just love. I'm just fascinated at the mystery that's there. Julia says, "Exploding mites!" Exclamation mark. That's not something I ever expected to hear crawling about my person, but I'm usually covered in mud and twigs, so I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. I know when people have seen photographs, you know, of magnified bed bugs, and they say, you know, because they're scary looking things. and because they look like giant crabs or giant something that's going to eat you. And it's like, well, yeah, but they're very, very small, and they're in the mattress, and they're there all about us. And I think it's good for us to be aware of that, that everything, we're all part of the mix. I mean, the idea of, the mites coming out of your pores at night and having a bit of fun among your eyelashes and all sorts of stuff. I don't know. Are they resistant to mascara, I wonder? Or do they only come out at night when you're not wearing it? Or, I mean, all of this is just fascinating.
And also, what is is it commensal, the relationship? Like, what are we getting from them? Like, are they cleaning us? Maybe, I don't know. But there's the symbiosis stuff is really interesting too, and and I love like you say, the mystery of slime molds. Like, I think one of the things that I just think is so fantastic about them is how, like, they're so hidden. And they're really hard to, you can see them with the naked eye, but you wouldn't unless you were looking for them.
Yeah.
But I feel like that it's so exciting. Hidden things are kind of exciting, and it's really satisfying to find them. But I think it also just shows how much we don't know and we don't see, and how limited like our human perspective can be, and the possibilities of the earth.
That's beautiful. Chris says they eat our dead skin, and if we didn't have them, we would smell like dead bodies. LOL.
There we go. Thanks, Chris.
So, yes, and Julala says, we found lots of slime mold here in the garden. I've paid much attention. I shall now. She must have said I didn't pay much attention. And then Karen, I found a fluorescence thing in the leaf mold in the garden on a dark night. Fascinating. That's brilliant. So, this is just fascinating. Now, I want to get on to, before we finish, your other book, Matrescence. Would you like to talk about it? That's this book.
Oh, it's nice to see it with you.
And I'll let you talk a little bit, because I hadn't come across the word before. So what is matrescence?
Yeah, so matrescence means like the process of becoming a mother. It's a bit like adolescence, putrescence as well, senescence.
Yes.
It is a word that was coined in the 70s by an anthropologist called Dana Raphael. I came across it when my first child was about 9 months old. And kind of briefly, I found the experience of pregnancy, childbirth, and early motherhood to be very seismic, existentially, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, physically, of course, psychologically, emotionally. It was a much wanted child, but I found myself kind of going to pieces a bit, and I was diagnosed with postnatal depression, and there's a lot of sleep deprivation, and kind of struggling with the modern institution of motherhood. Anyway, I found this word matrescence, and it was so profoundly helpful to me because it made me realize that what I was going through was quite normal. It was a significant developmental stage like adolescence, and at the same time, in the last 4 or so years, there's been a real explosion of landmark neuroscience and science around the parental brain, and how much pregnancy renders kind of significant pronounced changes to the brain, and how it's not just the maternal brain, the paternal brain changes anatomically, particularly with hands-on care. We were all born in, we all evolved in collective caregiving networks, so we all have the neural circuitry for looking after young children. Anyway, so the book is a kind of part memoir, part kind of science around this transition, which I think has been sorely neglected and forgotten, and part I guess, a kind of manifesto about maternal mental health, and we have a maternal mental health crisis in our countries, and lots of people are struggling, and there's different reproductive health issues too, and it's also got quite a lot of ecology in it as well. So I write about volcanoes and spiders eating their own mothers and sea squirts and slime moulds, of course. And the intention of that was to, I couldn't really find my when I became a mother, I found that kind of conceptions of nature were very oppressive to women, and there was this kind of sense of the natural being deployed as a way of controlling women and shaming them often. And actually, what I found was that my matrescence was like the more maybe gothic, brutal parts of our world, volcanoes and planets smashing into other planets, and that felt like a more authentic and interesting way to find myself. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix, and it's out now.
Yeah, it struck me somehow that, being a natural mother, you will listen to your own instinct, and you go, well, I don't know what my instinct is because I've just been faced with this, and you'll be fine. And how there's not enough conversation about it. And yet, when you look at depictions of in films of somebody's going into labor, it's a party and her waters break, and straight away, and I'm going, well, I had two, didn't happen like that. There was none of that stuff. And then screaming, wow, 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 all the time, and frightens the bejesus out of anyone who might be pregnant. That the depictions in films are always horrendous or cliched, or it's like patronizing or an insult. And yet I found, because I've had two babies, one at home, and I found that experience really, really empowering. So it was a very positive experience for me. First one was a cesarean section, having failed at home to have a home birth. And I wanted to talk about the positive aspects. And then reading your book, it's like, shit, have I been colluding? Because it isn't easy for everybody, And then do people really want to hear about it? Do you talk to somebody when they're pregnant about what it's like? Or do you say, no, they're dealing with enough without scaring them? It's a hard one.
It's a really hard one. I've been really conscious about that because my book is very personal, and the birth chapters are graphic. And I hope you don't feel like you're colluding. That no, I think there's ways of I don't know. I think it's the birth stuff, I find quite hard to talk about because it's really triggering and tricky, and I don't know. I think there's a lot of people who have birth trauma walking around, and it's unrecognized. And even if ideally you'd want everyone to have a positive and empowering birth. My second birth was hard, but it was empowering, and it was at home. But lots of people do find birth traumatic. I think a third of women say that they find their births traumatic, and it kind of feels like with postnatal culture and care, people give birth and then they're kind of given the baby, and then they're kind of on their own, and the birth is kind of hushed up. And as you say, there are very little stories, myths, art, TV of kind of honest depictions. But it is tricky because it's something that I've been quite I've kind of said to people if they're pregnant, like just the birth chapter is really intense. But then I also would have quite liked to have known about some of the things that can happen, like birth injuries and risks and so on.
I was a nurse, so I was aware of them, but it's a really interesting. Linda says, I know I had I had postnatal depression after my firstborn, but I had no help and just muddled through. But luckily I took herbs to halo my second birth, and I know that herbs helped heal the trauma from the first birth. I had a cesarean section that I didn't want, and I wanted everything at home on my terms. Blah blah blah. I do things quickly. I speak quickly. I run quickly. Everything's fast, except each of my labours were 48 hours. Just like my mother's. She had 5 of us, and it was all 2 days, coming.
Yeah.
And I adjusted because I'm great in a crisis. If it's a crisis, I always sweat the small stuff, but big things, no, I'm fine. So I had to go into hospital, have a cesarean section, for which I was awake. But at 10 weeks, I felt I had failed, and I went into a huge grieving process. I had, infections and things like that. But I had a lovely midwife, and she helped me breastfeed, and I managed to breastfeed even with a wound infection and all of that stuff. And I had a wonderful co-parent. So all of that was managed. Had I been with somebody else, I have friends who, in relationships who weren't supportive. And if I had had the same circumstances as they, I don't think I would have managed. And I had what would you say? He's a delightful young man now, but a challenging baby at the time. So I was supported. And when my daughter was born here, she's just born behind where I am now, we took her to Africa when she was 5 months old. And you could really see, I could sit down and eat with my 2 hands. You're not eating with your 2 hands yet, are you?
My youngest is 2.
Okay, well, you know that thing about you want to sit down and then there's the child on your lap and you're doing that.
Yeah.
While you're in that culture, you don't do anything for 6 weeks. So while, you have your lochia, all of that, you are minded, you're fed special foods, and your husband would be severely criticized and looked down upon if he did not make all efforts to get this special strengthening foods post baby. The women, you don't do any washing, cleaning. Everyone does that for you so that you're recovering for your first 6 weeks. As my midwife told me, you stay in bed for 2 weeks and you rest for 4. So I wasn't allowed out of bed. I mean, apart from peeing or whatever it was. No, you are resting. And I've seen women with cesarean sections, pushing supermarket trolleys after a week. And you shouldn't be doing that. Because the modern world doesn't care for women, where traditional cultures do. And I had people just taking my kids away while there's mealtime so I can sit down and have a meal. You're never on your own. But in the modern world, you are. And that is really, really difficult.
It really is. That's so interesting hearing those experiences. Yeah, I think that the kind of tension between the vulnerability of a newborn baby and the vulnerability of a mother after birth, however she's given birth, just it clashes in such a strong way with the kind of values, mainstream values of our culture, and bounce back culture, and women being kind of praised for like getting their bodies back or getting back to work, and almost as a kind of denial of the experience that we have all been through of being born and of being incredibly vulnerable. I think that there is a kind of pathological denial of vulnerability in our culture, which if we can bring natality and birth and the realities of that into the light, it would make the world much better and much kinder. I see so many mothers, who have quite a serious, systemic health response to becoming mothers. From things like kind of sepsis and psychosis, and lots of course, some people kind of sail through, but there is a crisis. There is a maternal crisis in this country, and it doesn't have to be like that, I don't think.
I agree with you. Sean says, my wife is a midwife who has personally delivered many hundreds of children and guided so many women through. But when our daughter was born, it traumatized her that nothing went to plan, that she didn't have the control that she wanted, that was suffering into a stigma that she had helped so many women fight. It was so difficult, and the postnatal depression was difficult, but her strength, her ability to push through was so inspiring. And Okay, Liz, and both Liz and Philosophical talk about pathological denial of vulnerability in our society. Yes, you must have said that. And there's two others echoing that. And the emphasis about getting your figure back, and my God, you wouldn't know, look, that that is the struggle. That is the aim, when in fact, no, it's not. It's my brain went. Memory. Because I was like focused on this baby, I didn't care about the outside world. And it took maybe until my kids were 2 that I was beginning to look out again. And I can see that's nature's way of making sure you look after your baby. But what about, and I was lucky, I mean, I'm self-employed, but I was under pressure to go back to work for my clients. I felt responsible that I should get back. I stayed longer with my second child, but that it should be as focusing on that. And then for those who have to go back earlier for financial reasons or whatever, really hard, because then you're pulled this way. You are not a good enough mother, and you're not a good enough employee, and you're trying to push this one and try to be here. And it's like, crazy. And Julia, this is funny now. My youngest is 22 and I still have my baby belly. Well, I'm telling you now what your baby belly is, Julia Foyle. That is your badge of honor. You have earned the right to have that baby belly. That is what you've done with your body. And if anyone ever comments, you just ask them, what have they done with their body? I have one too. And wear it with pride. You have the right to have it, and Nimi says, everything back to normal was once a standard question for a new mother. Once you've given birth, nothing will ever be normal again. Absolutely.
Such a good point. I think it's like the 6-week check that they give now, and that's when you're kind of meant to be normal by. But I think kind of matrescence and postnatal lasts probably forever, and yeah, I think there is like really interesting, like deep possibilities about what an academic called Andrea O'Reilly calls a matricentric feminism, because it kind of feels to me that feminism has done a lot, liberal feminism has done a lot, but it's kind of ignored mothers and caregivers and fathers. And like when I became a mum, like I kind of thought me and my husband were kind of equal and we would equally share everything, and it just didn't work out that way. And it kind of feels like it's the stalled revolution, and actually to open caregiving up to all people, to fathers, to society as well, that could have really like important ramifications.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there needs to be Sorry, go on. Sorry.
There's some really cool stuff happening. Right, there was something in Sheffield where it's like a nursery in an old people's home that's been set up, and I think like I'm doing quite a lot of book events at the moment, and afterwards there's a lot of comments and questions from people, and really get a sense that people in caregiving roles are kind of yearning for that intergenerational community and kind of a way of being together. And yeah, it's so important.
And of course, it's that, yes, I mean, elderly people just having babies around them. I worked in I used to be a nurse, and I worked in a home for elderly women who they were well. It wasn't a nursing home, and there was a young girl who used to come in and clean, and she was a young mother, and it was run by a nun in her 80s, and there was a single mother, and this is now in the 80s. Sorry, the nun was in her 80s, and this was the 1980s in Ireland, and this young mother was allowed to bring her baby to work. I mean, that doesn't happen. You don't bring your baby to work. And this woman was, and she would bring the baby in to the sitting room where all the elderly women were. And it was just, baby loved being there, and the women loved having a baby, and her mother could do her work. And it was just a lovely arrangement. Rare, but that was a very broad thinking elderly nun in 82 who ran the home.
What a lovely story.
Isn't it?
This makes so much sense. Like there was a really interesting study that came out recently about hunter-gatherer societies and allo parents. So that means like, you know, people apart from the biological parents who help kind of raise children in, you know, our traditional societies and how humans lived for 99% of our evolutionary history. We lived in these small groups and it was collective caregiving. And this study came out recently, which it studies a hunter-gatherer group today. And like the mother of a baby would normally respond to the baby's cries like 50% of the time. And the other 50%, it was something, I'll probably get the numbers wrong, but it was something like 10 to 15 other people were there, you know, to look after this baby.
And would feed the baby as well? Like, were there other breastfeeding women there?
Perhaps. But I think, you know, that's how our nervous systems evolved. And I don't think our nervous systems have changed very much. And that's
I know women who've produced milk. I mean, breastfeeders, they hear a baby cry and they produce milk. But I had a friend, we had children, babies the same time, and we had made an agreement that if ever we were minding each other's children, if they needed to be fed, it never happened, it never needed, that we would feed each other's babies. I've seen that in Africa, you know, your baby's crying and you feed them. I know I've heard women here go, absolutely not, I would not allow that. And I'm thinking, actually, I'd be very grateful if somebody fed my baby breast milk instead of formula, because mine was being breastfed. And that wonderful, what would you call it? Just that collaboration, reciprocity among mothers to be able to do that. I mean, because I was in between. I'm an elderly mother, so I had friends who had babies way before me and then way after me. So there was very few around the same time as I was really, that really reassured me.
Yeah.
It never came to it, but that it was there, possible.
Yeah. And it's really beautiful how I think, you know, women donate their milk for babies in the, you know, intensive care. And it's tale as old as time. You know, people have always been fed by other women, and I guess in a way it speaks to, there's this kind of you know, the privatization of family and the kind of nuclear unit, which until I became a mother I thought the nuclear unit was like traditional. I didn't realize that it's like a relatively new experiment. You know, and I think, you know, possibly even in the last 10-20 years, like social forces have made you know, even like neoliberalism has kind of even increased privatization and individualism and this kind of sense that you're in this, you know, home. And it's almost like, I've been thinking quite a lot about feminism in the 70s and like consciousness raising groups and kind of collective childcare collectives. And I think things are starting to change a bit now, but I don't know, something about that privatization which it doesn't really work when you need people. It's nice to have your privacy and autonomy, of course it is, like, but in moments of vulnerability, it's so stark.
I don't think you appreciate how you need a community when you have, it's just, you're not told about it because we're talking about it now, but we're living in a society where we're managed to cope. And I mean, that's what's expected. And then people say, no, we want to have our own little unit here and it'll all be lovely. But it's actually, no, you need. So when my son was born in hospital, cesarean section, I got out after 36 hours. And my home midwife came and stayed with me for 10 days. And so Howard and I and the baby in her bed with the monitor, and she slept in the sitting room. So when Ruan would cry, she'd come to help me latch on. And she stayed with me.
And was it a kind of normal thing to do? She
was so this was 25 years ago. So she was a home midwife, a domiciliary midwife.
10 days.
And well, she came and went. She was looking after her other mothers, but she was checking in with me. So for the first 3 nights, she slept in the house, going about her business during the day and coming back and making sure I was able to, because I had a post-op wound infection after about 5 days.
Yeah.
That she found difficult to manage because she had no experience of wound infections because her mothers never got infections. I picked it up in the hospital.
Ouch.
But that was brilliant. So she was there supporting. I had that.
Yes.
And that really, I was lucky.
Yeah. I think we need that now. It's it's so necessary to have that. And people live far away from their parents and their families, and I think the government needs to do more to support new mothers.
That's right. But also communities. Somehow we have to do that, but it's very, very hard. Like, where are we? Where are our friends? How do we support? But having conversations about it so that people can recognize, actually, I am going to need my community. I'm going to need this kind of support. And it's not just about baby showers and presents for a baby. There's actual practical support, bringing food, feeding, dropping off food to the house, doing housework, because that's what would happen in more traditional cultures, say certainly in Africa and Asia. You'd have people doing that and then chatting, and you're not isolated. So someone can take your baby while you need to sleep.
Yeah.
And I mean, sleep deprivation is, so with Ruan, I didn't sleep during my pregnancy. I think there was one night in my whole 9 months. Now, someone says, you must have been ambivalent about being pregnant. No, I was delighted. It's just I found pregnancy hard and I didn't sleep. And then he didn't sleep till he was 14 months. And so, crazy making. But
yeah, there's nothing, sleep deprivation is just another planet. It's not like tiredness, it's like illness.
That's right. And there's nothing like, you've had a few late nights partying. That's not the same kind of sleeplessness as been chronic with the child.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, I have friends who, had babies that didn't sleep, and they had to get up to the baby because they were on maternity leave. And I said, did your husband not get up? No, because he's to go to work. And I thought, well, let me tell you from my experience, it's much easier to go to work, having been up with a crying child during the night, than staying home with that child afterwards.
Absolutely, exactly. But I think that speaks to this kind of fundamental kind of devaluing of care work, and this idea that it's like maternity leave, like you're on holiday, and that I thought this before I became a mum. Like, I thought care work was easy work, and it's so much. Admittedly, my job isn't, I don't work as a doctor or anything like that. I'm a writer, so it's not difficult. But care work I find much harder in some ways. I mean, better too in lots of ways. But that the devaluing of care is a big problem. But I think also, like you mentioned, kind of practical helping. But I think conversations are really important, because there is so much. I've seen this in my interviews for matrescence and correspondences that have been published. There is still so much shame and stigma and silencing of struggling in early motherhood. I think people are, don't want to kind of say they're struggling, because it will seem like they're complaining about their beloved child. And I think being able to normalize, honest conversation and having real depictions of this experience will help, because shame and stigma silences, and then often that can lead to isolation. It did for me, and then that can, I think of my postnatal depression as a kind of, it was like a wound of matrescence in our society, which is hard, and then it becomes an infection, it spills into something more, deep-seated. So yeah, and I think that the word matrescence could be helpful in that, because it gives people a way of saying, how's your matrescence, or how was your matrescence? Because I think people carry, I've got this from readers, decades after, can carry kind of trauma around birth, or trauma around, and all sorts of things to do with this very ordinary experience.
Absolutely. And I'm really grateful to you for your book. Timey says, oh yes, nowadays the surrounding community thinks staying home with the children is being lazy, turning thumbs basically at a walk in the park. Interesting. I remember seeing a little video on Facebook a few years ago where husband comes home, he's living in a housing estate, parks the car, and there's a child, his child, toddler, running around with a full nappy, and there's toys and bits of this and the cereal bowls all over the place. The sitting room is a mess, the kitchen's a mess, and no sign of his wife. And he goes up the stairs and she's in bed reading a book. And he said, what have you been doing all day? And she says, nothing. And that's what happens when she does nothing.
That makes me think of the strike in Iceland. You know, the women who they strike in Iceland. I think every year they have. You know, Iceland has.
Tell us about that.
So, I think Iceland has like really progressive policies, like good childcare, good parental leave, leave for caregivers of any sort. And it seems to me, and I might be simplifying it, but one of the reasons why that happened is because I guess it was the 80s or 90s, like all the women went on strike for a day, just wouldn't do anything. And so the men had to, you know, take it, and they do it every year. They did it every year, or maybe they did it more. And that seems to be what, you know, it showed what was actually happening behind the scenes, which, as you say, was definitely not nothing.
Absolutely.
But also the other side of it is that not only is it like very, you know, can be really challenging work, so it needs to be shared. Also, I think that, fathers can be different to the way fathers have been in the past now, but I think, you know, men miss out on the chance to be with their children and to nurture and to be, you know, wonderful fathers, and then the children miss out too. So, you know,
Howard, he had his first. My husband, he had twins when he was 23, and he had 5 children in his 20s into early 30s. Then he was 53 when our son was born and 57 when our daughter was born. So he was able to, he'd reached, you know, the top of his career. So he was able to work part-time. His colleagues thought he was crazy. And no, he wanted to do that. So we were co-parents. So he got a second chance. And his daughter would say, you know, how he parented his first children is so different to how he parented his second children, because he was able to, and our kids were home educated. So they always had one or other of us. And then when he was 61, he retired. So for the last 8 years of his life, he was a full-time dad. And we traveled, and, you know, they had a really, really good time. And his friend envied him. He said, I've missed out on this. And I have a grandson now, but you're getting a second chance at this. But how do you manage work, career at the same time, you know, as be a parent as well? So
yeah. Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
It is?
No. It's I don't know how we manage that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know either.
No, because that's the challenge, you know.
Yeah,
if you're a lone parent.
Yeah, and I think like the economic situation. Sorry.
You know, you have to earn a living, and you have to also look after your child. That's that. And I couldn't be a stay-at-home mom all the time. I just could do it, you know, well, until they were 2, and then I needed to. There's something calling me out there to be able to do. So I always worked part-time, so that I had some work, and then I was with my kids as well.
Yeah.
But I was lucky to do that.
Yes, I work part-time too, and I think lots of mothers, caregivers do. The problem is, though, that, you know, if you work part-time, you are penalised.
That's right.
Your pension, and
yes, you are. So Howard was, yeah.
Could be it needs to be much more fair. Yeah.
Sean says, it's such an honor to be a parent. Every moment a challenge and a joy. Don't like missing a second. So thank you, Sean. That's lovely. You know,
It's lovely.
and I mean, funny with Ruan, I breastfed him until he stopped at 17 months. So Howard would bring him to me at lunchtime, wherever I was. So I was lucky. So I was able to do that. So, and nobody objected. But I was very fortunate that if I was consulting to an organization and we were in a hotel and I was doing some training and we were at lunchtime, Howard would come and say, all my work was on condition that I can feed my child at lunchtime.
Yeah, that's really sweet.
That was, but I had somebody minding him who could bring him to me.
Yeah.
That was really, that's not for many people. For most people, I imagine that's not the case.
No, but it should be.
Yeah, so it's around. So usually I ask this question: a concern you have about the modern world? Just one.
Just one.
No, you just need one because I'm sure you've many.
A concern. Okay. I am concerned about the lack of access and opportunities all children have to restorative natural spaces and wild play. Really like the forest school movement and the outdoor education movement. But I am concerned about things like the domination of cars in our urban areas and the destruction of biodiversity, children not being able to climb trees, children not having the kind of chances to be out there. And we know that can be unequal across class and race and socioeconomic lines. My research for Losing Eden, if I needed convincing, it just convinced me that we unequivocally need time in natural spaces and the chance to have a relationship with the living world for our mental health. And as the climate crisis worsens, and that's a concern for me. One of many.
And I think many people will echo that. Funny, we live in a rural area here, and I would never let my kids outside the gate because you're not going on a bike out there. It is too dangerous. Where I came from a rural area, now granted there were less cars, and we went off for hours unsupervised, told never to go near the river. Of course, where did we go? Near the river. But unsupervised, that loads of freedom, playing in trees, in the woods, catching what we call, pinkings and jam jars, from streams and things like that all the time. And being able to cycle a bike on rural roads, off picking berries, nuts, whatever. And my kids didn't have that. Okay, we have a wildness and they traveled and things like that, but they just couldn't walk out their own gate because the roads are too dangerous. And that's urban or rural, and never mind urban. So it's and there's also, fear around children climbing and hurting themselves and
insects and all that stuff.
Yeah, and poisonous berries and dangerous plants and all of that stuff. But in fact, okay, there are poisons. There are, but on a scale of things.
Yeah.
Well, certainly in these islands, we don't have dangerous biting beasts, poisonous and things like that. So, Philippa says, I realize how lucky I've been most of my life amongst trees and fields and wildlife. Yeah. So what gives you hope then?
Well, I have to say that like my world kind of in the last 7 years or so has been quite local and has been kind of small in a way. So I think one of the things is going back to what we were saying about that field. Acting with neighbours.
Sorry about that. I cut you off by mistake. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I was just probably rambling along.
No.
I was just saying that things are quite kind of, my world is quite small at the moment and has been for quite a while, and kind of quite local, I suppose, to the point where I'm going to mention my field again. And I think the experience of kind of connecting with neighbours and our local councillor and seeing this field erupt and it becoming a space where children can come and play, and you know, the possibilities of joining with community, and that there is a kind of like always brimming hope in people, or kind of a desire in most people to leave the world in a better place. So, and then I suppose it is when I find it hard to think in the ways I've been taught to think, and the logics that I've been taught to think in, terms of kind of individualism and kind of separation between people and self-reliance and self-sufficiency, all these things, I find hope in kind of turning to the earth again and thinking through slime molds. And I'm not saying, obviously, the earth is not like a benevolent thing in a way of, I don't know, it's complicated. I know that I'm putting my own. Oh, if I cut off again, it's probably a good thing. Am I still? Can anyone hear me?
Done that again. Sorry about that. Apologies.
No worries. Maybe the resilience of the earth is hopeful for me.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's doing what we can. And I mean, I have some image at the back of your garden, just that green space with the trees and everything popping up, and I just see my own arc. I have a labyrinth that's formal and the rest is wild, and I try, allow things to emerge. When I came here 25 years ago, this was a field, just mown grass. I've no more room for trees, and it's a little oasis in amongst intensive farming, and it's about creating those little patches for all of us that give us hope. Pat says, hope for an abused world in 3 words: things grow back. And
I like that.
I think we can get overwhelmed when we think of the big world and the big picture. But I think it's just about what small thing can I do?
Yeah.
It's what's the smallest thing I can do, and do it.
Exactly. And it really, it, as someone who'd not really ever been involved in the democratic process, or never kind of contacted it, never done anything really like getting involved in real world in this field, it's so empowering to see that actually, if you join with other people and say to your local councillor, actually, we don't want this to be mown, or that it is possible,
and that you can be heard.
Yeah.
And Amy says the seasons cycle and we find new shoots emerging from the decaying leaves of time past. And and that is so true. And Sylvia says, be kind, continue the quest for the marvelous. And I think also is about never losing your fascination with what you can find. So you've opened up a world to me now in slime mold. So I am off to explore. And the fact that it's so mysterious and so beautiful. And people used to say, you know, describe something bad as a fungus. And now we can't do that anymore when we think of, oh my goodness, just look at, you know, the mycelial networks and how these are our lifelines on so many levels. And now we have these little mites eating our dead skins, keeping us healthy and smelling a bit more pleasant. All of that there's so much mystery, and never to lose the fascination with it. And I think even with all the stuff, I mean, the state of the world is so painful at the moment with all the violence and the concerns about climate change, but that we still need islands of hope, pockets of hope, to create maybe countries and continents of hope. And then having these, you know, pathways and lifelines to each other about that. And also having conversations like the one we're having this evening.
Yeah. Reservoirs of awe. I think fascinated by the science of awe and how powerful awe can be, and you know how in our society we might think of awe and wonder as a luxury, but actually, you know, it's possible to have like micro awe, you know, on your street if you're curious about the pavement plants and the lichen and the moss. And I think awe could be really powerful.
It's a word that's used sometimes very trivially. I like to save it for big things, because I think when we lose our awe, we've lost. And it's the awe with watching a baby walk, or the awe of the first smile of a baby, or spotting something, a bee. I was in Italy recently, and it was a sunny day, one sunny day, and there's a rosemary. It's almost like a little tree, rosemary bush in flower, full of insects. All of them bees. I don't know if there were any honeybees. It's probably too cold for the honeybees. But these beautiful black bees with big bodies and big, big black wings. And my God, did I have awe. And then all sorts of colorful flying insects, you know, all pollinators coming out, and I could hear the buzz.
That's awesome.
It's just wonderful.
I think when you see like a abundance of animals, like a lot of creatures at one time, that is definitely a route to awe. But I wonder, I don't know what you think about this idea. Sometimes I think that we've so lost our, like we could do with feeling awe in the kind of old school biblical, more like sublime sense of fear about the earth. And it's almost like we've so like dominated the land that we're not really respectful of the land. And actually we could do with feeling some awe in that sense of fear, in a way, about our living world. And I feel like in our Western culture, we've kind of, and I guess in a way that's one of the, you know, takes us back to Druidry. That's what I really like about Druidry, the kind of sense of like respect, you know, for the trees and the plants and the land. And I think even birth can speak to that as well. You know, there's something about
danger,
exactly.
Danger. You know, we risk our lives to bring babies into the world. We're not meant to say that.
But I wonder whether it's one of the reasons why birth is so hushed up, is because it kind of that fits the narrative of us being kind of in control and above the earth, you know. But
it's a funny thing, because for me, it's like, say, obstetrics have taken over midwifery, and it's like, because birth is dangerous and we're going to take it over and make it safe. And one level, yes. However, psychologically, how safe is it? You know, you need the art of midwifery. You need all of that other stuff to take care of the psychological aspects, because obstetrics is it's about keeping the mother alive and the baby alive at whatever cost, and without honoring the wonderful experience of it and the psychological and spiritual aspects of birth. So, I mean, that's another bugbear of mine. But you have frozen. Are you still there?
I have frozen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. That's great. But that all, I think, the fact that we have an illusion that we're in control of things. Are you still there?
I'm here, but I don't know why I've frozen.
Okay. Anyway, I can hear you.
Okay.
Just your camera has gone a bit funny, but
Yeah.
that we think we're in control, and then we get smug and then full of hubris. And I know that feeling I get if I'm walking along a pier and there's a really powerful sea and the waves, and I can feel that I'm amazed at the sea and I love it. Then I get that sense of, oh, I'm not in control here.
Yes.
I have to be careful, not get smug. There's something greater and more powerful than me right there, and I can feel it. And that's a really nice feeling to have.
Absolutely. I actually had that this morning. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. My whole screen is.
I can see your. I can see your face, but it's a still photograph.
It's frozen. Yeah, I was in Crick Howell in Wales this morning, and there was like the river was just rushing so strong under the bridge, and I just stood there and watched the river for a while, and yeah, I really had that sense of like, whew, you know, the power, the power of the earth, and I guess in a way that's why you know, like birth and death, they're kind of the portals, aren't they? And there's something about I don't know, the denial of death in our culture. But if we think about death or have that relationship to death, then it makes life much more vivid.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. There's just one comment from Sulwan. I was so afraid to give birth that I had to have surgery to get out the baby. And then I only felt as a mother and a woman when I succeeded to breastfeed my child. I'm glad you had that resolution, Sulwan. You're back. So,
I'm glad you had that resolution too.
It would be lovely for all of us to have wonderful experiences, but you know,
it's not.
I remember Howard had a friend, and his mother, when she was in her 90s, he went to see her, and she was a bit upset, and he said, "What's wrong, mother?" And she said, "I've never experienced childbirth." And he said, "What do you mean? You had 3 children?" She said, you all popped out."
Oh.
She was one of those lucky women. They just came out. Where I remember mine.
I don't think that's something to regret. I mean, each to their own.
You know. So anyway, Sulwan says she breastfed for 2 years. Wonderful. Delighted. That's just a wonderful post-op experience. Wonderful. We've come to the end of our time, but my last 2 questions, they're always my last questions. What is your favorite season of the year, and what is your favorite ritual to mark the wheel of the year?
Okay. You know, I like, it's kind of a bit of a lazy answer, but I do like all of the seasons. I don't particularly like summer, actually. Although, you know what, I can answer these questions together because Lunacer has helped me like summer. I have always, from my late teens, there's something about the summer. I would get depressions in the summer. Like school would finish, and I would often have depressions in the summer. And there's something about the summer that I psychologically find really difficult. And I think it was, you know, talking to you, Eimear, when we talked a few years ago. I think we talked about Lunacer, and there's something about the way I can't remember how you described it, but thinking about Lunasa and kind of the wheat and the harvest, I don't know, I can't really explain it, but it just changed it for me. I always like Baltana. I do like snowdrops around Imolc.
Okay, Imolc, yes.
Yeah. I feel like I'm really early in my Druidry journey and still learning.
We all are. Thank you. It has been such a joy talking to you. Just a wonderful conversation, and from slime mold to breastfeeding to childbirth to all, it's just been absolutely wonderful. So I will allow you to say goodnight to everybody, and then we look over at the comments afterwards. Okay. So
thank you so much. I loved talking to you. It was amazing. And I learned so much. It was a real honor. And lovely to be with everybody as well. So thank you and good night.
Don't hang up. I'm going to send you back to the green room and then I'll talk to you.
Oh, you're going to do that. Okay, cool. Amazing.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. So listen, thank you all so much for joining us this evening and for your wonderful comments. And again, as always, there are lots of comments I didn't get to read because sometimes they come full on and I only get to see a few of them. So just thank you all for your wonderful comments, and I look forward to seeing you next week. So enjoy the rest of your evening, afternoon, morning, or if you're watching a recording of this chat. And until we meet again, Slán go fóill.